It looked like a simple portrait of a plantation owner and an enslaved woman, until experts spotted something they were never meant to see. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood at the loading area of the National Archives in Washington, D.C., as she signed for a package with no return address. It was an unusually cold Tuesday morning in March 2024. She had been the curator of the Civil War photographic collection for 12 years and had handled hundreds of items, from early daguerreotypes to small card photographs. But this box stood out. It was wrapped with care in plain brown paper, marked only with her name and the archive's address in neat block letters. Inside was a short typed note. Dr. Mitchell, I have had this photograph for 30 years. I bought it at an estate sale in Charleston, South Carolina. I think it may be historically important, but I do not want to be identified. Please look closely. Things are not what they seem. The truth matters more than my name. Anonymous donations happen from time to time, usually when someone inherited an item with a painful or complicated history. Sarah opened the wrapping and found a small Civil War-era card photograph, about the size of a business card. It was in surprisingly good condition. The image showed two women posed in a studio with a painted backdrop of columns and drapery. On the left stood a white woman who looked to be around 28 to 30 years old. She wore an expensive silk dress with a wide skirt and lace at the collar, the style of a wealthy Southern woman in the early 1860s. Her hair was neatly parted and pulled back, and she stood with calm confidence, one hand resting on an ornate table. On the right stood a young black woman, maybe in her early 20s, dressed in a simple dark dress with a plain white collar. A white head wrap covered her hair, like those commonly worn by enslaved domestic workers. Her hands were folded at her waist. Her shoulders were slightly drawn inward, and her eyes were lowered in a restrained, careful expression expected of enslaved people when photographed with those who claimed authority over them. Sarah had seen many images like this. They were created to promote the idea that slavery was gentle and orderly. They always made her uneasy. They portrayed a controlled scene instead of the reality behind it. She turned the card over. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, Caroline Ashford and her girl Rachel, Charleston, South Carolina, March 1863. No last name for Rachel, only a possessive phrase. This was common. Enslaved people were rarely granted full names in official records. Sarah placed the photograph under proper lighting and reached for her magnifying tool. The donor's warning echoed in her mind. Something about the picture had made them speak up after 30 years. What had they noticed? At first glance, everything matched the normal photographic style and materials of the 1860s. But as she studied the faces, she felt a small spark of suspicion. Something was off. She called her colleague, Dr. James Warren, an expert in forensic photo analysis. When James arrived, Sarah showed him the photograph and the note. He examined the image through her magnifying tool before setting up his digital microscope. As he increased the magnification and began marking facial points on both women's faces, the similarities became hard to ignore. The distance between the eyes is nearly identical, he said quietly. The cheekbones, the jawline, even the way the ears line up with the eyes. These two women share multiple inherited features. Sarah leaned in. So you're saying they're related? Almost certainly, he replied. Possibly sisters. The similarity is too strong to be random. Sarah felt a heavy chill. She knew what that likely meant. Many children born to enslaved women were fathered by white plantation owners through force, and those children were enslaved as well. If the women in the photograph were sisters, it meant Caroline's father had fathered both of them and kept one daughter free, while enslaving the other. James reminded her that they still needed more evidence. Facial analysis alone could not confirm it. They would need historical documents, genealogical records, and maybe even DNA from descendants if any could be found. Sarah and James began researching the Ashford family. Records showed that the plantation owner, Robert Ashford, had a daughter named Caroline who matched the age of the woman in the photograph. He owned a large plantation and a significant number of enslaved people. As they searched deeper through tax records and plantation inventories, they found a woman named Sarah listed as a house servant in 1850. Under her entry was a young daughter named Rachel, age 3. That child would have been a teenager by 1863. but ages in enslaved records were often rough estimates and could be inaccurate. Another document from 1855 caught their attention. In a clothing distribution record, a note beside Rachel's name read, "Extra fabric, master's orders. Girl looks like family. Keep her in house away from visitors." The message was clear. Rachel's resemblance to the Ashford family had been noticed, and she had been kept out of sight to avoid questions. Further records showed that Rachel's mother had died in 1860. Rachel would have been left alone at a young age in the household, controlled by her father and half-sister. They then found a typed transcript of Caroline's diary. One entry stated that her father wanted a portrait taken with Rachel to show how kind the family was to enslaved people. Caroline wrote about it casually, mentioning that Rachel needed a decent dress and that she planned to have her old blue silk altered to fit her. The photograph had been arranged by Robert Ashford himself, not as a memory of family, but as a staged image meant to portray a false narrative. As James continued digging through genealogical records, Sarah returned to the photograph, still thinking about the donor's warning. She decided to scan the image at the highest possible resolution. After the long scan completed, she began examining the digital file at extreme magnification. Most of what she saw matched the expected details of a studio portrait. But when she zoomed in on Rachel's hands, something unexpected appeared. They weren't simply folded. She was holding something small and hidden between her palms. It looked like a tiny folded piece of paper, barely visible unless examined closely. Sarah's heart pounded. She adjusted the lighting and contrast, revealing more of the small object. It was unmistakable. "James!" she called, unable to hide her urgency. "You need to look at this." At normal size, the hands looked like a standard pose. Under magnification, the hidden paper came into clear view. Rachel had held something during the portrait session, tucked carefully out of sight. She hid this on purpose, James said, staring at the image. Whatever it is, she wanted it kept secret from everyone in that room. "What do you think was written on that paper?" Sarah asked, "And does it still exist?" James read the anonymous donor's note again. "They knew it was there," he said. "That's what they wanted you to notice." "So the donor may have the paper too," Sarah said. "They might have found it along with the photograph." She looked at the tiny piece of paper hidden in Rachel's hands more than a century earlier. Whatever Rachel had written down must have mattered enough for her to hide it in plain sight during a staged portrait. "We need to find a donor," she said. The package had been mailed from Charleston, but there was no return address. When Sarah contacted the Postal Service, they explained that without a legal order, they could not trace the sender. So she moved to the only clue she had. The note mentioned that the photograph had been purchased at an estate sale in Charleston in 1994. Sarah contacted the Charleston Historical Society and began searching through records of estate sales from that year. After days of calls and cross-checking, she found a match. In June 1994, the estate of Margaret Petton Thornton had been sold at auction. Margaret had died at age 98 and was the last direct descendant of Caroline Ashford. The sale catalog listed many items, including a single lot containing around 150 mixed papers and photographs from the Ashford family. "That has to be it," James said. "The donor must have bought that lot. But why keep it for 30 years? Sarah wondered. And why send it now? Sarah posted careful messages on genealogy boards asking if anyone knew who had bought items from the Thornton estate in 1994. She avoided giving details about the photograph. A week passed before she received a reply from a temporary, untraceable email address. The message read, "Dr. Mitchell, I'm the person who sent you the photograph. I bought a box of Ashford family papers at the 1994 sale while I was a graduate student. I found the photograph and other items you should see. I waited to come forward because Margaret Thornton's descendants were still living and well known in Charleston. I did not want to cause harm to people who were not responsible for their ancestors' actions. The last of them passed away 6 months ago. It is time for the truth to be known. I can meet you in Charleston and give you the rest of the materials. I would like to stay anonymous, but will provide everything I have. Reply if you wish to proceed." Sarah read the email several times. The donor had more materials, and the paper Rachel had hidden might be one of them. "I need to go to Charleston," she said. "We both should," James replied. "If these documents are real, we need to handle them properly." Sarah wrote back immediately, agreeing to meet. The donor responded within the hour. "Saturday at 2 p.m. Charleston Archives and History Center, Meeting Street. Ask for a private examination room. I will drop off a box and leave. Please review everything carefully. The truth about Rachel is more surprising than you think. And yes, the paper she held in the photograph is included." A chill ran through Sarah. The paper Rachel hid during that portrait had survived. The next day, she and James flew to Charleston. They barely slept, too focused on what they might uncover. On Saturday afternoon, they arrived at the archives and waited in the private room Sarah had reserved. At exactly 2 p.m., someone knocked. A staff member handed Sarah a box. "Someone just dropped this off for you," she said. They didn't leave a name. I couldn't tell who they were. They wore a hat and sunglasses and left right away. Sarah thanked her and set the box on the table. It was heavier than expected. "Let's begin," James said, putting on gloves. Inside were several items wrapped in tissue paper, each marked with a handwritten label. The first was a worn diary labeled Caroline Ashford Petton's Personal Diary, 1862 to 1867. The second was a bundle of letters between Caroline and her cousin. The third was a small family Bible from the Ashford Grove plantation. The last item was wrapped in several layers of tissue. The label read, "This is what Rachel was holding. Read it first." Sarah and James exchanged a look. With steady hands, Sarah opened the thin square of old paper. It had been folded very tightly and torn from a larger sheet. In neat handwriting were the words, "I, Robert Ashford, acknowledge that Rachel, daughter of Sarah, is my natural daughter and kin to my daughter Caroline. This is written by my own hand. God forgive me. April 7th, 1863. Below the text was a signature. The room went still. "It's a confession," James said quietly. "Signed." Sarah tried to steady herself. "He wrote this a month after the photograph was taken. He must have been very sick. He died 2 years later." "But why write it down?" James wondered. "Maybe guilt," Sarah said. "Maybe fear. He knew what he had done." "And how did Rachel get it?" James asked. They photographed the confession carefully, then opened the next set of materials. The first marked diary entry, dated March 1863, described Robert calling Rachel into his study as he grew weaker. Caroline wrote that Rachel left the room looking shaken. A second entry, dated April 10th, confirmed everything. Caroline wrote that her father had confessed Rachel was her half-sister and had given Rachel the written document. He asked Caroline to treat Rachel with more kindness, though he still refused to acknowledge her publicly. Another entry showed that Rachel kept the confession hidden and refused to say where. Caroline noted that she struggled to treat Rachel differently because she still viewed her as a servant. Then they reached an entry that changed everything. Dated December 1865. It stated, "Rachel has left. She waited until the war was truly over. Then she took her things and father's paper and walked away. I cannot blame her. She made it," James said softly. "And she kept a confession," Sarah added. Next, they opened the letters. One from April 1863 repeated the same truth. Caroline admitted to her cousin that Rachel was her half-sister, but feared the social fallout if anyone found out. Finally, they opened the family Bible. At the bottom of the births page, squeezed into the margin, was an entry written in a different hand. Rachel, daughter of Robert Ashford and Sarah, born 1847, sister to Caroline. At the bottom was a final note. "This entry made by me, Rachel Ashford, December 20th, 1865. Before I leave here forever. I write my name because I am family, whether anyone accepts it or not." Sarah felt tears fill her eyes. Rachel had written herself into the family's official record before walking away. She claimed her place. James said they photographed every page. The picture of Rachel's life became clearer. Caroline knew the truth, but never freed her. Other family members knew too, but hid it. Robert confessed privately but never publicly. Rachel used the only tool she had to claim her identity. "We need to find out where she went," Sarah said. James began searching through records. After 3 days, they found her in the 1870 census in Philadelphia. Rachel Ashford, 23, literate, working as a seamstress. She had kept her father's last name. They followed her through decades of records. She became a teacher, married a Union Army veteran, and raised 3 children named Robert, Sarah, and Caroline. She lived a long life and died in 1912. Her death certificate listed her parents as Robert Ashford and Sarah. For months later, Sarah had tracked down living descendants of both sisters. Both families accepted the truth, and Rachel's courage was finally recognized.